Chet would sometimes play other notes, but he'd never play wrong notes. On a deep level of musicianship, that's absolutely true. And in the interest of becoming a better musician, the reality is that great musicians get to do things that other musicians simply don't get to do. I mean that about the act of playing itself and becoming free on the instrument. I'm just going to show you 3 things that Chet did that if a lesser musician had done it, would have been mistakes. But as a deep musician, you get to do things like this. You learn the rules in order to learn when it's okay to break them. This first example comes from Chet's solo guitar arrangement of the Fats Waller tune Ain't Misbehavin. It was on the album Hi-Fi and Focus, 1957. He plays the entire thing solo. It's one of the great classic Chet Atkins arrangements ever. But the original composition dates back to 1929 by Fats Waller. I first learned this detail from Jim Nichols, who was friends with Chet and played with Chet, toured with Van Morrison and Kenny Rankin and Tom Waits. Later on, I validated it through my own independent research. Speaking of which, there's some footage of Fats Waller playing the tune in 1943 with Irving Ashby on guitar. Irving was one of those guys who slipped through the cracks. He used to play with Nat King Cole. Richard Bennett turned me on to Irving Ashby years ago. In the Chet Atkins arrangement, it's in the key of A, which is very good for fingerpicking. The Fats Waller version that I'm familiar with is in the key of E flat, but for simplicity, we'll keep the entire reference point in the key of A right now. At the end of the bridge, there's a phrase that Chet plays like this. Chet begins with a chord that's B9. Chet then resolves that B9 into an E chord with an added 6th and 9th, E6-9. But that's not how Fats Waller actually composed the tune. It's just how Chet played it. Fats Waller composed the tune with that ending phrase beginning on what would be the E chord in the key of A, recalling that I'm keeping this all transposed to the key of A, so we only have to deal with one key instead of jumping between a couple different ones to keep this clear. So the Fats Waller version would have the chords at the end of that last phrase in the bridge beginning on the E6-9 chord instead. Then it would go to the B9 chord. Yes, Jazz Police, I know what a 2-5 is, but I'm trying to keep this basic so it's accessible to more folks and can help more people. So the basic gist of it is that Fats Waller would have gone from E to B7 and then finished at the bridge. What's the lesson there? And why did it still sound so good when Chet mixed up the order? Well, whether or not he was aware of it or not, and I'm not going to claim either way, Chet was a great musician. He very well may have been aware of it, or possibly it was just something that he did and he got a good take on, and then it was time to move on to the next tune. Editing was a major hassle, you had to splice the tape, and there was no making things perfect in Pro Tools. In either event, that melody note up top works with either chord. It's the 5th of the E6-9 chord, or it's the root of the B9 chord. Harmonically, playing the B9 chord first and then going into E9, it's a secondary dominant. I don't want to lose anybody here, but the basic point is that B9 leads very nicely into E. If you're not entirely sure why and you want to learn more, I would highly suggest learning a little bit more about the circle of fifths. If you only know 3 chords, that right there is a huge chunk of American music. And those 3 chords are referred to as the 1, 4, and 5, or tonic, subdominant, and dominant in theory speak. So all that Chet did is he preceded the E chord with the dominant. It's a secondary dominant, it's a B9 chord, leading beautifully into an E chord. After that, Chet goes back to the B7 chord and finishes out the bridge with the same turnaround that Fats Waller composed the tune with. I rest my case. Melodically and harmonically, what Chet did sounds really good, works, makes musical sense. It's just not exactly how Fats Waller composed it, but the end result is still a classic Chet Atkins arrangement that has stood the test of time and is absolutely great in every way. Chet also changed the melody at the end of the bridge. It's neither a criticism nor a justification. In fact, it's an incredible lesson. But the fact is, he doesn't play the melody as Fats Waller composed it. The way that Fats Waller composed it, and is documented on the recordings and evident in several lead sheets throughout various fake books, is a descending diatonic melody. If it were in the key of A, the notes would be B, A, G sharp, F sharp, and E. that's not what Chet plays. He plays something that to my ear is a bit bluesier. Chet plays this. Did Chet play the wrong melody? Well, not so fast. This gets into phrasing and interpretation. That's the last phrase of the bridge. It's on the way back to the main A section of the tune. It's really helpful when you're learning tunes. Learn the lyrics even if you're not going to sing them. It helps with phrasing, interpretation, and all that good stuff. How often at the end of a phrase do you hear a great singer putting a little improvised moment in? Or if you're thinking in a full band context, how often do you hear a guitar player answer the singer in between the words with some kind of phrase on guitar? The great early bluesman Charlie Patton would do things like that all the time, where he'd sing a phrase, then answer it on the guitar. With B.B. King, there's no separation from his guitar and his voice. One seamlessly follows the other. The guitar was Chet's voice. It was Jeff Beck's voice. It's the voice of any great instrumentalist, and it's the extended voice of any singing guitarist. So what Chet played there was perfect. No, it's not exactly how Fats Waller composed it. Yes, he changed things around. Yes, he reversed the chords. And yes, he played a different melody up top. But it all fits together in a very musical statement, and what Chet played there was as good as anything anybody else would have played, and better than most. Without becoming critical or overstepping my bounds, there are times where Chet did make mistakes, but they weren't wrong notes and they weren't jarring bad notes. For example, he got the melody to Swedish Rhapsody just a little bit wrong. One of the all-time classic Chet Atkins arrangements from 1956 on the album Fingerstyle Guitar, but the tune dates back to 1903, and it was composed by Hugo, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, Alphen. In 1953, Percy Faith had a big hit with it. One of the things that Chet would do is he would pay attention to the charts and what was popular, because if the general public was already familiar with the tune, then his guitar arrangement of that tune would be more likely to sell. And remember that Chet was trying to sell records, so Chet kept an eye out on what was already popular. The thing is, with no irreverence intended, Chet played the melody wrong. I was taught this by our friend Pierre Danielou over in France. The actual melody to the Swedish Rhapsody goes like this. Chet plays this. If you don't believe me and you don't believe Pierre, just go to YouTube and look this stuff up. It's so easy to conduct research now. Everything you want is at the tip of your fingertips, either on YouTube, on Spotify, or on some streaming platform. Research like this used to require a lot more work. Did Chet play the wrong melody? Chet himself was a stickler for the melody. You gotta remember that Chet came up in a time in particular when melody was king. Paul Simon called it in a really good interview with Paul Zolo over 30 years ago. The age of big band was the age of melody. No one's ever come close since. And then he paused and said, maybe Paul McCartney. Chet was very conscientious of melodies, but here is the reality. The economy of motion is better in the way that Chet played it. That opening part of the theme is within a 4-fret region of the fingerboard, spanning from the top part of an A chord up to the 9th fret on the high E string. That's very efficient, but to play the melody as it was actually composed, it requires either moving down to the 4th fret on the high E string, and from there you go on with the rest of the tune, or grabbing the note at the 9th fret on the 2nd string, in which case you have to switch strings. In the realm of right-hand technique, a lot of times the barrier to clean, efficient picking and fast picking comes when you have to switch strings. Now, of course, Chet had the technique to have done that. I've worked my entire life at the guitar, and I have the technique to pull that off, but it's a little bit less efficient. So the bottom line is, yes, Chet changed the melody, but what he played was really great, with a really great economy of motion. And oftentimes when I play it now, since Pierre showed me that, I'll play it the way that it actually goes. Pierre would tell me you gotta pay attention to this stuff. It's very important. Bye Blackbird is of course one of the great American standards. It was first published in 1926. Chet knew so many tunes. He had a very musical mind, a great ear, a great set of hands. and was certainly one of the most important guitar players of the 20th century. Now, out of respect, I want to be a little bit vague about this, but Chet played the melody right. But I've heard some other fingerstyle guitar players playing it wrong because they took Chet's embellishment out of context. But I always like to do some research on the tunes that I'm playing, so a few years ago I did some more research on it and confirmed that truly the way the tune was composed is with the opening melody, if we were in the key of C, being the notes E, 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 then up to F, back to E. Also listen to early recordings of the tune and famous interpretations. Miles Davis's recording to me stands out as one of the great moments of American music. And of course, Chet played the tune quite a bit too himself. So what would happen oftentimes is Chet played the melody correctly. He would state the melody the way that it was composed, establish the melody, and then he'd take a little variation with it. Well, the variation became the way that other fingerstyle guitar players are playing this thing beginning to end. And that's not really the melody, it was just Chet's variation. In terms of the melodicism of it, if we were putting this in academic terms, it's a lower chromatic neighbor. It's just a half step below, so he's starting on E, playing a little bit of the melody, and then leading back into E from E flat underneath. In a lot of country guitar styles and a lot of blues guitar styles in particular, the minor third to the major third is a defining characteristic. Well, that's what Chet was doing with the little variation. It's not the way the tune was composed, and once he'd established the melody in the way that the tune was composed, after that, then he put his own spin on things. That's no different than any great jazz guitar player, any great improvising musician. It's a very common, appropriate, and ultimately musical thing to do. But remember to establish the melody first, the way that it was written, and then take your variations. There's the lesson to Chet Atkins playing Bye Blackbird. Respect the melody, and once you've respected it, then you can take some liberties with it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again the next time.